Welcome to another episode of the Spinoza Triad, where Richard, Dan and John discuss the life and works of Ludwig Wittgenstein. So we've all been reading Wittgenstein. Why, though? Yes, but why? What is it about the Wittgenstein, the man, that interests us? I think he's a fascinating character.
One thing that interests me is the fact he went to school with Hitler. Not that I'm approving of anything, but it's very interesting. Need to rein back there. But the very interesting, two guys that shaped 20th century history were both in the same primary school together and have a photograph of them staring out through history, not knowing at the time as small boys what their destiny was to be. And I find that quite interesting. Whether they knew each other, they were both staring out at us into the future.
But there's another factoid that I heard that relates to that. Factoid. This is a factoid. That apparently, there was a point in time when you can identify a particular year when in Vienna there was Freud, Wittgenstein, Hitler, and Stalin were all in the same city. So it wouldn't have been impossible for them to all have been in the same bar and maybe met up. They didn't, obviously. What a thought, though. That'd be a great, who are those? They are a bit lonely going that bar. There was a bloke over there to fall into conversation. Stalin, Freud, Wittgenstein, and
who has
Hitler.
the most intense stare? That's what it'll be, isn't it?
I think.
And this Wittgenstein guy just didn't stop talking about language all the time.
No, he kept going on,
to have my
and he threatened someone with a poker. And oh no, doing very badly. The thing is, of that crew, I'll bet you'd have found Wittgenstein the most intense. That would have been competition. There'd been a bit of competition there.
Close spot with Hitler, yeah.
He was. I'm not sure if I met Wittgenstein. I'd like him, from what I know. I think he's quite a very intense character. So he's born into this enormously rich Viennese family, and his dad what did his dad make money out of, Rich? You were telling me something about it the other day. He was not always very honest, was it?
Well, I think it was around the railways with the Russians. It was to do with the steel. He'd got some deal together with the Russian, and he was like the middleman for the importation of the steel, as I understand it, and made a massive amount of money through that. And then took it on, and he started to educate his children. And now I think it was there were 5 boys, weren't there? Of which was it 3 of them committed suicide? You had Ludwig, and you had his brother who was
pianist who lost his arm.
I think, yeah. Then you had one of them was a soldier that shot himself after the First World War when his troops weren't paying attention to him. He committed suicide. He had another brother that went off to America, and I think he threw himself in the river or something, didn't he? I think in the sea, committed suicide. And I might be confusing these two there, but there's the one story as well with the brother that was in theatre that made the pianist or something in a bar play some sort of song and then commit suicide after. I might be merging those two together, but I think it was there were 3 that committed suicide, tragically, and then they were sort of brought up in a household, I think, where you had they were homeschooled, weren't they? I know he was at school with Hitler, wasn't he, primary, but he was largely homeschooled, wasn't he?
Yeah, the picture we're painting here is of Vienna, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, late 19th century, is a bit of a place, as we said, Hitler's there and so on, and possibly Freud and so on. It's a hotbed. It's a uniquely artistically flourishing sort of place, and you're this enormously rich family, a self-made dad who's colossally wealthy, who's got a virtual monopoly on the steel making and iron ore industry for the iron importation for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They're massively rich, and as far as I understand it, quite a demanding sort of family. They had to achieve had to be successful because Dad had been, and that's and Wittgenstein is the one he's a bit odd apparently, and they're a bit worried for him, and they're very pleased when he becomes interested in mathematics and engineering.
Does he fight in World War One?
Yeah,
because we go to Manchester University, doesn't he?
Well,
Does he avoid the war?
Well, he turns out to be very good at engineering, so they pack him off to study at a technical college. They're quite relieved he's good at something, and he's very interested. They pack him off to a technical college in Austria, I think, but certainly he ends up going to do a master's degree in engineering at Manchester University.
He doesn't. He doesn't get drafted because he had a hernia operation, but then he went around it and volunteered anyway. I mean, I've got the diaries. I thought it was fascinating, really. It's the other very good source was the Ray Monk book, where they go into quite a lot of detail about his time in the war. But no, he did fight in the war. I mean, it wouldn't be a reason for it, but one of the things he does mention in there is about he starts off as an atheist. He's brought up as an atheist, and then he goes off to war with a copy of Tolstoy's Gospels. So he didn't have, apparently at the time, he hadn't read the actual Gospels, and he found a kind of spirituality and a relationship with a God.
I was going to ask because I thought he was brought up in a Jewish household. Was it a secular Jewish household, or
they're Jewish in origin, which is going to get them into trouble with the Nazis. So they are Jewish as far as the Nazis are concerned. There's enough, they are Jews, but they are not. They're not practicing. They're a secular household.
And I think, and that's a theme that really runs through all of his thought. That's one of the reasons I think that, he's an interesting guy, a character, because his life story, it correlates so well with his actual thought as well. I mean, I don't want to sort of preempt it here, but
no, I'll develop that point, Rich. I'll build on that, because I think that if you are Wittgenstein and you're you become deeply interested. He becomes very, very interested in the idea of spirit, kind of spirituality relationship with the metaphysical world, even though he rejects that as a sort of pursuit. So, in other words, he's trying to understand something of the ineffable. He's like, he goes into war. You telling me this, when he goes into war, in a sense, in order to experience the closeness to death, because he thinks that will be useful and revealing.
There seems to be a kind of an underpinning thing with him, with this authenticity, and he's very hard on himself. I think there's a kind of undercurrent. There's a religious dimension to him, which he seems to struggle with.
So he goes to Manchester to study engineering, and he's doing aircraft engineering, apparently, sort of propellers and new forms of jet engine and such. Long before jet engines are a thing, long before Frank Whittle, they're sort of looking at ways of making efficient jet engines. And he's very good at maths, very, very good at maths. And he gets a copy of Bertrand Russell's Principles of Mathematics. And he reads it, which apparently is very difficult to read. He reads Principles of Mathematics. Whoa, this is really, he's asking questions like, what is mathematics? Is it found? Is it existing in the world? Or is it an imposition by human beings? The philosophy of mathematics is quite fascinating. So he's fascinated by that. And he heads off to Cambridge to find Bertrand Russell.
It isn't like, it wouldn't be like some, I don't know, guy off the street following around Bertrand Russell. I mean, he gets away with a lot, doesn't he? It's like the story with him is that he gives away all of his wealth. But he's so wealthy; they've got so much money and he gives it to his sister. I think the two sisters, the most of it, and he's still in a position where he can gift various people throughout his life, pretty big sums. So it's not ever, he has this kind of bohemian lifestyle, and he doesn't stay anywhere for too long and moves around, but he's obviously able to do this because of the wealth behind him. So he gives away his money, becomes a school teacher, or he becomes a gardener.
So his family is supporting him throughout.
Well, again, it's when you read that, you read certain parts, and it makes out like he's giving away, and he's just living on a teacher's wage. I don't think that's true for an instant. No, I think he's got him giving away all his money is still a massive amount of wealth behind him, and a name. Of course, he would have been very well known at the time. So he's gone off to see Bertrand Russell. He's clearly very charismatic, and he's turned up there with and in effect, he did kind of follow him around. And Bertrand Russell says, he said, write me an essay, didn't he?
A bit unclear about it. He doesn't actually go to university, does he? He doesn't actually have a degree?
No. Well, he studies technical engineering in a sort of polytechnic-y technical college. Then he goes off to Manchester to do an MA.
Normally, to work in philosophy, you need the history of philosophy and the various thinkers that you have to have read, and then you arrive at you do your PhD, and then you can have some new ideas. And he didn't do any of that. They think that he probably read Bertrand Russell, Schopenhauer, apparently, and Freud as well. Sorry, John, Frege. I mean, he's quite. I mean, to the philosophers at the time as well. He'd read a lot of Freud, which was kind of unpopular amongst philosophy at the time, and I think this as well had some impact on what he was trying to say in the Tractatus and the Philosophic Investigations. I think that kind of that fear of the sublime or the religious, the aesthetic, the ethical. I think he was worried about things like psychoanalysis, psychology, or these other things encroaching on that.
That his lack of philosophical grounding, shall we say, perhaps affected the output of his philosophy. And the fact, when I was reading Wittgenstein for the first time, I was amazed that he said, "I've solved all of philosophy."
Yeah,
and
yeah.
He hasn't actually entertained any of the philosophy that has been knocking around for the past 3,000 years. So I think he's coming from a position of ignorance rather than knowledge when he says, "I've solved all philosophical problems."
No, I was just going to say, well, he's engaging specifically with logical positivism, which was a dominant form of philosophy at the time. Which he was looking at. He was for Bertrand Russell and mathematics. Bertrand Russell had also written a lot about language, and I think it was specifically in that area that he was approaching things. You're absolutely right, though, and of course that's logically in some respects a strength, isn't it, as well? And he said the same with his students as well. He did chastise them for reading too much philosophy when they should be thinking.
But he's picked up from Russell, and he's picked up from Gottlob Frege the analytical, this sort of movement of analytical philosophy. And it's trying to get away from the people we like, and have talked about in the past, Nietzsche and Hegel and such, like these grand narratives, this broad kind of metaphysical understanding of where we are in the universe. And they're trying to say, well, what can you actually understand through the use of language? What can you actually say? So even though he's not an expert in Hegel, he's not gone to university and studied Aristotle and Socrates. He's a well-read guy, a professional, as it were, academic philosopher. Yeah. But he is familiar with analytical philosophy. Dan, you said, what kind of philosopher is he, in a sense, because he's so he's not got a degree in it. He's not sure himself, so he goes on. He stalks Bertrand Russell around Cambridge. Is it Oxford or Cambridge, isn't it? He stalks him around Cambridge, and he goes and Bertrand Russell. You can find an interview with Russell saying he's a very odd man, very odd. Eventually knocks on his door, which is where the Wittgenstein comes in. Rich and I were thinking about this. Introduce yourself to Bertrand Russell as Wittgenstein. Oh, hello, Mr. Wittgenstein. Do come in? You're going to get that, aren't you? Because he's from enormously rich, hugely famous. It's a bit like someone using the name Vanderbilt or something, or I don't know. Musk. I'm Elon Musk. Could I have a quick chat with you about something? Well, the trouble is, Musk is a genuine idiot. But you might well say, "Oh, that's quite interesting. I can tell people I talk to you." So he gets a listening, and he famously says to Russell, "Look, I'm not sure whether I should do philosophy because I think I might be talking nonsense, or whether I should and carry on with engineering, or whether I should devote my life to philosophy." And Russell pops on his podcast. "Well, my boy, well, I think you should write me an essay over the Christmas holes and bring it back. And that's what he does. He writes him an essay.
And he's suitably impressed.
And he brings it back and he says he read the first sentence. So the story goes. He read the first sentence or two of this essay and said, well, I can tell you right away, you must devote your life to philosophy. So there you go.
When did he become chair of philosophy at Cambridge?
That's what he did.
In the 50s? Well, no, he died in the 50s. When does he die?
Effectively, he spends his time at Cambridge talking to Russell. They give him a job there as a lecturer. And then the First World War breaks out and he goes off to fight in the First World War for the Austrians. And because he's called Wittgenstein, they don't want to get him anywhere near the front. It's like, Ray, no, you stay well back there. You're too famous. We don't upset your dad. He makes all the steel, for crying out loud. We can't have his son killed. So he's desperate to try and get into any sort of danger for reasons we mentioned earlier. And so in the end, he does. He actually persuades them to put him right in the middle of it, in a sort of front spotter role. He's out in no man's land where most of the spotters get killed. And he comes face to face with death on an imminent basis. If you get through a day, any morning he wakes up, he can probably die by the evening.
Well, he just wants to stay alive. It goes from these philosophical ideals to, he just wants to stay alive. I mean, he must have been confronted by a lot of death. And he ends up in a prisoner of war camp.
He does. He gets captured by the Italians.
And it's there that he finishes off the Tractatus. So the manuscript was kind of partly written in the First World War. And Russell, he manages to get someone to come in to get the manuscript out. And he could have got out himself as well, apparently, but he didn't. He stayed in the prisoner of war camp. Which, I mean, there's a lot of things about him. Right? He's just a fascinating person. When you read about him.
Well, he didn't want special treatment. He avoided, release them all or not, we can let this man out. He's a famous philosopher. Apparently famous people like Russell were writing letters saying, can we have this one out? And he says, no, all or nothing. I'm with the men. So he's a man of great principle.
We don't hear about him having many friends or, close associations with anybody. He doesn't get married. I think he's homosexual, is he? I'm not too sure. But he doesn't form any bond.
Who was the guy he was very friendly with who died?
Frank Ramsey, a genius young philosopher and out mathematician from Cambridge who they became close friends. And lots of stuff about were they was it more than that? And Ramsey died very young, in his 27 or something.
Well, am I right there? Doesn't have many close associations, or am I wrong?
Well, later on, he formed a good bond with his doctor in Cambridge, where eventually, at the end of his life, he went to that family and they looked after him in his last few months. There's his doctor. Then there's a woman called Elizabeth Anscombe, who's an analytical philosopher of the 20th. If you went to Cambridge and looked at his grave. Apparently 2 graves along, you've got Elizabeth Anscombe. She was his executor and she translated some of his stuff, and she was a great and deeply influenced by him.
I think so, and he did seem to fall out with people, didn't he, as well? I mean, Bertrand Russell, he fell out with. I think no fault of Bertrand Russell's. Who was the other one I think he fell out with as well?
Popper he threatened with a poker.
With a poker.
There's a book about that, isn't there? There's a book written about that event.
Yeah, that's another sort of anecdote. They had got into an argument with Popper and threatened him with a poker. Oh yeah, he had quite a temper if people didn't understand him. So he got angry with his students. He got angry with people that he thought didn't get what he was trying to say.
That was a criticism against him, wasn't it? If his ideas weren't particularly sound or weren't overly coherent, he would just accuse everyone of not understanding him. So he'd pass it on as being their fault. And there were I think it was Keynes was it he fell out with, or I can't remember one of the letters where he's talking about our friendship can no longer be tenable, and it was literally just about a philosophical point, and they didn't talk for many years.
Yeah, he thought that Russell misunderstood him. So Russell wrote the introduction when they published the Tractatus. By the way, someone among our company has a first edition Tractatus.
I do. Yeah.
Where did you get this?
I do, which I have been studying from. I got it from my dad acquired it through his work. He was working for the BBC in the late 60s, I think, and they gave him a first mid 60s, and gave him this copy to read. So I've still got it.
Fascinating.
And I was using it for this podcast.
Before we started recording, I told you that my family had bought me The Happiness of Dogs for Christmas.
Yeah.
And that's clearly what they think I would read. So why did your dad get given the Tractatus? It's not something I would buy for someone.
He will, because I think BBC executives and journalists received publications at the time hoping that it gets attention and interest. So Dad was a BBC journalist in the 60s. And so he tended to get freebies, these little freebies he'd get. And that was one of them.
But before you found it on the shelf, did your dad ever say to you, "Oh, you must read this. This is a good one"?
No, it remains unread. My dad hasn't read it.
Probably going to be the case of a lot of people who've got copies of the Tractatus on their shelves. It's not easy.
Very difficult. Yeah, I mean, without companion guides or lectures, it's a fascinating book. I wouldn't say it's like the enjoyment of it is in the difficulty of reading it, isn't it?
So they get him out of the prison camp. As you rightly say, Dan, he thinks, as only a young man could, that he's solved philosophy. He's to such an extent that he doesn't need to go back to Cambridge and be a lecturer anymore, because what is there to talk about? He's done that. He's done philosophy. He's brought that to an end. He then goes off to become a school teacher. He becomes a primary school in sort of rural Austria. He goes to design a house for his sister. I'm not sure where that falls exactly in that period, but essentially
fails as a teacher though, doesn't he? He doesn't survive very long.
Apparently the students like him when he's not in the classroom. He's a nice guy when they're walking in the woods. You were telling me this, Rich. Yeah, but in the classroom he got very impatient, and in fact he's sacked for knocking a boy unconscious. I think that would be a disciplinary in our day even.
It would be a criminal action now, yes. He would be in prison if he did.
The head had to have words with him, put it that way. And while he's there, he's formulating. Now he's famously, to what an extent we might talk about, we might not. Did he completely revise his view of the Tractatus, or did he build on the Tractatus? There's a lot of debate about that in philosophy. But he's starting to form a new kind of philosophical set of thoughts. And he goes back to Cambridge. And that's where he gets a chair of philosophy and he teaches. He after doing that,
with the investigation.
Well, he doesn't publish those in his life, but that's what he's teaching. He's teaching his new kind of philosophy will turn out to be in a book published after his death.
The investigations, yeah, which is almost turned Tractatus on its head, doesn't it? The second part.
Well, I'm going to say
that's
a sort of matter of debate. Certainly, does it build on it? He certainly rejects some of the things in it.
Well, but he says that they should be read together. So he has a series of notes. So he doesn't publish. He publishes Tractatus and then nothing for many years. But he's doing philosophy. He's writing stuff down. And he's got, I think, the various notebooks, like the blue book or the brown book. There were a series of notes that he did. And then after he died, the investigations were published. But I think that point there, Dan, I think if we go back to the Tractatus is it's a very short book. It's very dense, but it's ultimately trying to say what can be said. Just to finish off,
he goes back to Cambridge. He lectures there for a while. He eventually stops lecturing there. He does other things. I think it's either then or before then. He builds his sister a house. He goes and lives in Norway in a field, in a house in the field for a bit to have a think. He goes to America for a bit and he contracts prostate cancer. He returns to Cambridge to the house of his doctor, lives out his remaining years with his doctor, and dies. And the book is published in the early 50s. So after his death, so I was just saying, Dan, he dies after he dies at his doctor's house. The book is published, and that becomes the second sort of masterpiece. So his life is bookended, rather. So as a young man, he's got the Tractatus. After his death, they publish the philosophical investigations. And while he was at Cambridge, it was these ideas that he was teaching. Thank you for listening to this episode from the Spinoza Triad. You've been listening to John Gibbs, Dr. Richard Miller, and Dan Rowland as we discuss things which interest us. If you enjoyed this podcast, listen to it again on Spotify or many other platforms. Thank you for listening.